Hello and welcome back to Neo-Psychology of me, your teacher, Mr. Neo, the channel where I teach psychology and sociology lessons to my wonderful students. Let's get started. Today we are starting a new chapter which is called Demography. Okay, so this is lesson 1, births. We're going to have a look at births and we're going to discuss what is this demography you speak of throughout the lesson. Here we go. Starter. Are people in the UK having more or less children today in comparison to the 1900s? What do you think? Are people in the UK having more or less children today in comparison to the 1900s? What do you think? Right, here are our learning objectives for today. Learning objective 1, show comprehension and apply knowledge of what is demography. We're going to find out what is demography. This whole chapter, this whole unit is going to be on demography. What is it? What is demography? And to identify and analyze births. Let's get started on LR1, shall we? What is demography? Demography. Family and population are closely linked. For example, new members of the population are mostly born into and raised by families, while the kinds of care they receive from their family affects their chances of survival. Similarly, as the study by Anderson shows, when people migrate from country to country or from region to region, they often rely on kin to facilitate their move. Kin meaning relatives, meaning family. The study of populations and their characteristics is called demography, okay? It's the study of the population, you know? Is the population getting older? Is it getting younger? Is it getting bigger? Is it getting smaller? Right? What about the rest of the world? What about Europe? What about Africa? Are there differences? Okay? The study of populations and their characteristics is called demography, okay? I would say the demographic of students at Coombe are relatively well off, I would say. I'd say it's quite a good demographic. I'd say they come from quite decent backgrounds. Like from, I wouldn't say poor. I'd say quite well off backgrounds because it's sort of like New Malden and Kingston area. Whereas the school I was at last year, they come from quite a disadvantaged demographic where it was in quite a poor area of London where there was a lot of issues at home and single parent families and potentially abuse. These characteristics include size. Is the population large or small, growing or declining? These are all things that we question in demography. And age structure. Is the average age of the population rising or falling? Is there more young people or is there more old people? Is the population getting older or younger? As the figure shows, the factors that most directly affect the size of a country's population are births, how many babies are born, deaths, how many people are dying, immigration, how many people enter the country from elsewhere, and emigration, how many people leave the country to live elsewhere. So you can see factors causing population increase include births and immigration, okay? If more people are being born, more babies are being born, we've got higher population. Immigration, if more immigrants are coming and they're immigrating to our country, we're going to have a higher population. However, factors causing population decrease include deaths. If you're dying, it's going to decrease the population. And emigration, people leaving the country, they're emigrating to another country. These are factors affecting our population size. In this topic, we examine some of the main features of the UK population and how and why it has changed. Britain in 1801 had a population of 10.5 million. By 1901, this stood at 37 million. So 100 years later, it had more than tripled. Okay? What effects does that have? You know, that's got to have some sort of effect. You know, in 100 years' time, that's only one generation as well. If someone lived to 100 years, they would have been born in 1801 and been like, look at the population, 10 million. And then by the time they died, they've gone, bloody hell, the population's more than tripled. What's happened? You know, how does this affect our lives? The current population of the UK is approximately 65 million, and one one projection is that it will rise to 71 million by 2031. So we can see it's getting bigger. So it's doubled. It's approximately, it's almost going to double from 1901 to 2031. I'm not sure if coronavirus has played a role in that, and maybe it might not be as high, potentially. Maybe not, I don't know. Until the 1980s, UK population growth was largely the product of natural change. What is natural change? That is the result of there being more births than deaths. Okay, that's natural change. There are more births than deaths. So it's increased just from natural change. However, since the 1980s, most of the growth has come from net migration. That is more immigration than emigration. So until the 1980s, if there was a change in the UK population, it was mostly to do just with the fact that there were people were having more babies than there were people dying. But from the 1980s onwards, most of the growth in the UK has not come from more births and more or less deaths. It's actually come from net migration. More people are immigrating to the UK rather than people emigrating out of the UK. Right. Definition. Define demography for me, please. Write down a definition. It's important to get a definition of the topic we're going to be studying for the next 10 lessons or so. Demography. Demography is the study of... I'm waiting for you. Go on. Say it out loud. I don't care if people are there. The study of population, good, including birth, death, fertility, and infant what rates? Infant mortality rates. Yes, that's when a child dies, usually before the age of 1. Immigration and emigration, and age structure, as well as the reasons for for changes in these. So, what is demography? Well, it's the study of population, including birth, death, fertility and infant mortality rates, immigration and emigration, and age structure, as well as the reasons for changes in these. Okay? Try summarizing the key term into 6 words. Can you summarize it into 6 words? Are you going to be an absolute legend to do the challenge? 3 questions. Pause it and answer them, please. Number 1, identify the 4 factors that affect the size of the country's population. 2, define the term natural change. And 3, define the term net migration. These should be terminology that you should now be familiar with and you should be able to use, right? Pause the video, answer those 3 questions now. Give it a go. Don't wait for me to give you the answer. I want to see it in your own words, in your notes. Right, let's have a look at the answer. What are the 4 factors that affect the size of a country's population? The 4 factors that mostly directly affect the size of a country's population are births and deaths, immigration and emigration. Easy. Define the term natural change. Natural change is the number of births minus the number of deaths. That's natural change. Net migration is the number of immigrating into a country minus those emigrating from the country. You might have a negative net migration where there's more people leaving than people coming. So for example, I don't know, but if I was to guess, I would say Poland, they would have more people emigrating out of the country than they do have people immigrating into the country. Right. Have a look at the graph on the right. The blue line represents the births in the UK since 1901, and the red line represents the deaths. Can you see any pattern? Right, let's have a look. So we can see this is the births. The births from 1901 was around 1.1 million births. As you can see, it went down drastically by just before 1920, and then massively back up again. And it hasn't actually reached that peak. Nobody has had as many children as they had since like the 1920s ever again that we've seen. Then the big decrease in births again. and then after 1940, 1941, a big increase in births, then a decrease again, and then an increase, and then a big decrease in births. And now it's since the 1980s, it's sort of gone up and down a little bit, and this is from here on is the projection where they assumed it was going to go. Deaths, you can see it's been relatively stable, a few more around 1920, and then again around 1941, a few more deaths, and then it slowly increased slightly, maybe due to the population, but it has started to decrease now, and you can see it's sort of, but they are projecting that there's going to be more deaths by 2040. I'm not sure how, like I said before, how coronavirus might affect this, but yeah, there might be a big chunk line going up in like the 2020, around here-ish, you know. Can you see any patterns? Right. Identify the 3 periods during which the number of births showed steep rises. Can you suggest any reason for a rise during these periods? Okay, so you can see there's been three times in UK history when there's been steep increases in births. You can see here in 1920, 1921-ish. You can see here around 1940. About 1945, 1946-ish, around here, and again 1960, 1964, 1965-ish, I'm not sure, around there. You can see 3 steep increases. Any reasons for these increases during these periods? Any suggestions why? Question 2, why did the UK experience periods with low numbers of births? Why were there such low numbers of births? Say here, for example, in the 1920s, and here in the 1940s. Why were there such low numbers of birth? 3, why do you think that the numbers of birth and deaths were so similar around 1941? So you can see 1941. Look, the death rate, the birth rate and the death rate were almost touching. They actually do touch here in say like just before 80s, just before the 1980s. There were literally just as many people dying as there were people giving birth. So the what was increasing, the natural change was not increasing, you could say. Why do you think the number of deaths is projected to rise in the coming decade? And then extension, summarize in 2 sentences what has happened to births and death rates in the UK since 1901. Right, one little sentence. Births since 1901 have blah, 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 increased at times, decreased in times, and death rates, blah, blah, blah. Give those 5 questions a go, please. Pause the video and give those questions a go. Right, and that is what is demography, right? Identify one thing you learned about demography. What is one thing you learned about demography? Why do you think learning about demography is important? How is it relative to sociology? How does this apply to our sociology? You know, society is what we live in. Society comprises of the demography. What is the demography of the society we live in? Well, you could say, well, you can see the population is growing, not so much because people are having more babies and less births, more so since the 1980s, because there's more immigration. How does that affect our society? Is there any changes because of that? Now we have more foreigners, mostly in London, more so in London than other places. How has that affected our society? Any changes? Anything for the better? Anything for the worse, potentially? You know, have a little think how this might affect society. How does demography apply in real life? Demography affects us in so many ways. You know, the population will affect us in so many ways, potentially with jobs and things like that. Maybe, I'm not sure. We'll have to find out. And what questions has demography raised for you? What are you still wondering about? Have you got any more questions? Let me know. Write them down. Put them in an email. Ask somebody else. And there we go. That's learning objective 1. Show comprehension and apply knowledge of demography. And what is demography? I'm quite confident now we know what demography is, and we know the terms natural change and net migration. Brilliant, good. Make sure you include those in your answers, yeah? Nice answers, right? So show comprehension and apply knowledge of demography. I'm ticking it off. Learning objective 1 is completed. There we go. Right, moving on to learning objective 2, to identify and analyze births. How are we going to look into this? Let's find out. To identify and analyze births. births. So this is pages 198 to 209 in the textbook, which can be accessed on the Google Classroom. Births. The number of births obviously affects population size. Sociologists use the concept of birth rate to measure births. The birth rate is defined as the number of live births per 1,000 of the population per year. Okay, so the birth rate is defined as the number of live births per 1,000 of the population per year. So if you were to get 1,000 people from the population, how many of those 1,000 people a year would have a baby? So as figure 4.2 shows, there has been a long-term decline in the number of births since 1900. In that year, England and Wales had a birth rate of 29. So that means 29 people out of 1,000 would be having a baby. But in 2014, it has fallen to an estimated 12. Now, let's have a look. Here on the graph, it's not done by birth rate. It's done by just births in total. So we can see the births in total is 1.1 million down to potentially around 0.7 million. But that doesn't tell us births in itself isn't as useful as birth rate, because if there's a bigger population, there's going to be more births. So, but that doesn't mean necessarily having more children. If we had a look at the births in China, you go, look, they're having loads more children than us. They must love having children. I go, well, actually, no. It's because there's a lot more of them. All of them are having around one child. But so if you have a look at the birth rate is a lot lower than the birth rate in the UK. So it's quite a good way of comparing two different countries with different populations, or even the same country with different time periods. So as we saw, as it says, England and Wales had a birth rate. So of 1,000 people in England in that year, it was 29 in 1900. However, by 2014, it had fallen to around 12 people. So only 12 people out of 1,000 would have had a baby that year. However, as figure 4.2 shows, there have been fluctuations in birth with 3 baby booms in the 20th century. Okay, so there are baby booms. The first 2 came after the 2 world wars. So you can see, after 1914 to 1918, there was a baby boom. You can see, bang, all the babies went up. And this was because it was after the war, right? The population had to be increased because so many men died. And there was a baby boom after 1945, it says, so around here. Yeah, so look, another baby boom. So these are boomers. And there's a third boom here. As returning servicemen and their partners started families, they had postponed during the war years. Yeah, so if I wanted to have a baby, I'll go, right, love, do you want to go and have a baby? Yeah, I'm all right, I should do that. Oh, hold up. What? We're going to war? I'll see you later. I'll see you in a few years. We'll have a baby then, all right? When the men came back from war, they would have their babies then. So you can see there was 3 baby booms, 2 of which came after world wars, okay? So you can see a baby boom here, a baby boom here, and a baby boom here, okay? People born in these periods are known as boomers, okay? So when you hear people say like, okay, boomer, that's related to the baby boomers from this generation, right? From the 60s, when there was lots of babies being born. There was a third baby boom in the 1960s, after which the birth rate fell sharply during the 1970s. The rate rose during the 1980s before falling again after the early 1990s, with some increase since 2001. Okay, total fertility rate. So, the factors determining the birth rate are, firstly, the proportion of women who are of childbearing age, usually taken to be the ages 15 to 44. So child-rearing age or childbearing age are the ages in which you would be most likely to be able to have a baby. So women between the ages of 15 and 44 are the women that are usually able to have babies. And secondly, how fertile they are. That is, how many children they have. The total fertility rate is the average number of children women will have during their fertile years. So you can see we have a fertility rate now, okay? You can't take all the women because women under 14 are probably not going to have children, and women over 45 are probably not going to have children. So you can't count all women. So the fertility rate is women between the age of 15 and 44 and seeing how many babies are they going to have on average. The UK's total fertility rate, or TFR, has risen in recent years, but it is still much lower than in the past. From an all-time low of 1.63 children per woman in 2001, it rose to 1.83 by 2014. Okay? Now, obviously, it's not women having 1.6 children or 1.8 children. Some women are having 1 to no children. Some are having 2, 3 more children. But the average, the mean, has gone up from 2001 to 1.63 to 1.83 by 2014. However, this is still far lower than the peak of 2.95 children per woman reached in 1964 during the 1960s baby boom. So during the 1960s baby boom, women were having on average just below 3 children. So the majority of women are having 3 children. That's quite high considering we're having almost half of that nowadays. These changes in fertility and birth rates reflect the fact that 1, more women are remaining childless than in the past, right? A lot more women are not having children, right? It's less of a social faux pas to say, you know, it's a lot more normal for a woman not to have children or to have maybe 1 child, whereas a lot more than normal before to have loads of kids. And 2, women are postponing having children. The average age for giving birth is now 30, and fertility rates for women in their 30s and 40s are now on the increase. Older women may be less fertile and have fewer fertile years remaining, and so they produce fewer children. So there you go. One reason why they would say the fertility rates have gone down is because women are waiting to have children later. Okay, women are now working more, so they have their own careers, and maybe they postpone having children until much later, sometimes until their 30s and 40s. Therefore, they've got a smaller time period to have the babies. Therefore, they've got less opportunity to have more of them. So therefore, the fertility rate is going down. Get in there, Grandma. Okay, fertility rate. Get the definition of fertility down, please. The fertility rate, right? The total fertility rate, TFR, is the what? It's the average number of fertile children. Oh yeah, the average number of children, comma, women will have during their fertile years. For statistical purposes, this is defined as age between 15 and 14. Now, of course, there are some people that have had children before the age of 15. And of course, there are some cases where women have had children after the age of 44. But on the whole, we're going to use the numbers 15 to 44. Right? So the total fertility rate is the average number of children women will have during their fertile years. For statistical purposes, this is defined as 15 to 44. So women can have, we found in the past, between 1.6 to potentially up to like 2.95 children during their fertile years. Right, 7 questions. Give these 7 a go. Pause the video now. Give it a go on your own. You'll do a lot better. You'll remember it a lot more, even if you do it and get it wrong, than if you just copy down the right answer. Number 1. There are 2 measures of birth. What are they? Number 2, how does one define birth rate? Number 3, what is the difference in the birth rate in 1900 in comparison to 2014? Number 4, define the term baby boom. Number 5, what causes the baby booms in the 1920s and the 1940s? Number 6, how does one define total fertility rate? And number 7, identify 2 reasons for changes in the birth and total fertility rate. What are the 2 reasons? Give those a go now. 5 minutes, 7 questions. Off you go. Don't be lazy. Do it. Right, let's have a look through the answers. Number 1, there are 2 measures of birth. What are they? The 2 measures of birth are birth rate. so how many women per 1,000 are having children, and total fertility rate. How does one define birth rate? The birth rate is the number of live births per 1,000 of the population per year. So it isn't looking at each woman having how many births in their fertile lifetime. It's how many women per 1,000 of the population are having children. And then number 3, what is the difference in birth rate in 1900 in comparison to 2014? There was 17 more live births per 1,000 in 1900 than there was in 2014. Right, define the term baby boom. Baby boom is a marked rise in birth rate. What causes the baby booms in 1920s and 40s, where it was World War I and World War II respectively? How does one define total fertility rate? Total fertility rate is the average number of children a woman will have during their fertile years of 15 to 44. And identify 2 reasons for changes in the birth rate, in the birth and total fertility rate. More women are remaining childless, so therefore they get less opportunity, and women are having children later. The average age is now over 30. And that's the births. There we go. Identify 1 thing you learned about births and how does it affect demography. The more births, if there's more births, the population's getting higher, of course. And the population's getting younger if you think about it, because it means there's more babies and less older people. Why do you think learning about births is important? How does births apply in real life? And what questions has births raised for you? What are you still wondering about? Have you got any questions? Please let me know. Right, learning objective 2, to identify and analyse births in relation to demography. Tick, we're done. That's today's lesson. Plenary. Watch this video about the global impact of coronavirus on births and fertility rates. Do you think the coronavirus pandemic will cause an increase or decrease in fertility rates? Now, watch the video because it's quite interesting, because it's difficult to say. Are people going to be having more babies now during the coronavirus pandemic? Because you would say they might be having more babies because people are stuck at home, so therefore they ain't got much else to do but make more babies. But you might argue, well, actually, are people going to be planning to having babies in such a difficult time when there's so much disease and questioning, you know, do I want to be going to the hospital when there's coronavirus going around? No, definitely not. Right? Press the link. You can access the link if you press the picture, or if you go into the notes section of the video, the link is in there as well. Otherwise, if you just Google the global impact of coronavirus on births and fertility rates into YouTube, you'll be able to find it there. Okay? And have a little look what might happen because of the birth rates in coronavirus. This is something you can talk about in your exams. You can talk about everyday life examples in your exams, okay? Coronavirus would be a really big thing to talk about, right? The implications of coronavirus on throughout sociology is really important, more so on demography than any other topic we're going to learn about in families and households. So have a little look at that video because it's important. And there we go. There's the lesson for today. Today's been lesson 1, births in the demography unit. Well done, my neo-sociologists. You're doing brilliant work today. Write your notes up. Upload them online. If you have any issues, please feel free to email me. I am here for you. Otherwise, have a good day. God bless. And peace.
I'm feeling like Will. I feel like a prince. I'm feeling myself. I'm loaded with bills. Cause I wasn't blessed with no Uncle Phil. Don't know how it feels. I wanted to flex. They told me to chill. I'm making a flip. My life is a flick. Now load up the film.